Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to On the Other Side, Leadership After Transition. I am here today with another LinkedIn connection. I'm telling you, I make more LinkedIn connections than a little bit, and I bring them on. I find them just to bring them on here so I can say I found them on LinkedIn. I actually should get paid for helping LinkedIn and being that guy. But anyway, I'm not going to sit here and talk too long. I want to bring him on because he is very interesting. I'm very interested in learning more from him, and I want him to share a story with you. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on our guest today, Mr. JC Glick. How you doing there, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you're here. So where are you talking to us from? I'm here in Florida, right? And every guest, I'm trying to hit all 50 states this year. Maybe I'll get some from overseas as well. But right now, I'm kind of working on the states thing. So where are you talking to us from today?
Columbia, South Carolina.
Outstanding. So did you end up getting out of the military in Columbia and love the area so much?
I did. I retired here, and kids were in high school and not wanting to change their high school. And then, quite honestly, I don't know that there's a better retirement state for veterans. They do so many programs for veterans, so many benefits for veterans. It's really a great place.
Outstanding. So I was back in Columbia from 04 to 07. And because I was so young in my career, I had much more to go. But I told my mother and I had told my wife later on that Columbia was a beautiful place. I loved living there. As a matter of fact, the only problem was I never saw Columbia because I only saw the inside of Fort Jackson. You know, being a drill sergeant all at the time, it was all those hours. But Columbia was such a wonderful location. I truly love the place. And I will stop by tomorrow evening and or Thursday morning and see Columbia for a little bit, but move on back up towards Charlotte. Well, anyway, what I want to do right now, before we actually start getting into the conversation, I want to paint a picture for you and how we met, right? So this is actually for you listening. This is the first time he and I have ever spoken. We were speaking a couple minutes before we came on here on this platform, but a little bit of time ago, I'm not going to put a date specifically, but I want to be on a TEDx show. I want to be on a TEDx speak. I want to speak. So I'm constantly looking for TEDx things. I'm looking at TEDx speakers. That's what I do. And one day I came across this guy who was a retired lieutenant colonel that was on a TEDx, and he happened to be in a vest, right? I mean, he was wearing a vest, and I was like, look at this guy. He's a big guy, and he's talking. I'm thinking he's going to get out there and give that same old military leadership speech of get up and go and be all motivated and hype. But I listened to it, right? And here it is. What you said in that speech, and I got to tell you, which is why I'm aligned with you, and I think that we think so much alike, is when I was a first sergeant major, promotion boards or anything else, I used to ask one question, and the question was, in one word, what is leadership to you? And there's no wrong answer to that, I guess. It really isn't, because it's what it is to them. It's the interpretation of the individual. Well, I never heard the one I wanted to hear because I thought I was just wrong, right? But my one word is inspirational. A leader is you inspired to be that person, right? And in your TEDx talk, which, by the way, I'm going to share on my page right after we're done with this interview so other people can listen to it, because it's inspiring. Listening to what you're saying is very thoughtful. It's motivating in itself, but it's a shift in people's visions. Because if you listen to the Army's definition of leadership, the process of influencing soldiers to accomplish the mission by providing purpose, direction, motivation, at no point in time does it make mention of inspiring or inspiration. And for you to say it, I was like, so I found you there listening to the TEDx. I went to LinkedIn, found you on there, and I looked at the things you were doing, and I was like, man, he's out here. I'm not going to say what you're doing because I want you to tell everybody what you're doing. But I said, I need to be where this guy is because he's where I want to be in life. So I reached out to you, and through that time, we've changed back and forth. And I gotta tell you, another thing is a lot of my guests are they're referred to me. Like someone will say, hey, you need to talk to this guy. Well, you were one of those referred people too, but I'd already been engaged with you because now retired Colonel Jody Miller had said, hey, have you heard of JC Glick? I was like, I'm preparing. We're getting ready. We have a date lined up. And he said, good. He's a great guy, and you got to have him on your show because he's doing some awesome stuff. So anyhow, That's my story. So what I'm going to do is stop talking now so I can actually let you share your story with us. So do me a favor for our guests, kind of give us a background of who JC Glick is, how did you get into the military? What was the thought process? And then tell me a little bit about your career as it was.
Yeah. So, I was not much of a student in high school or growing up, and I think they call it a gap year now. I just called it not smart enough to have anybody willing to take me into college. Through some very, through my father and my stepmother, I was able to. I took 2 years off and I worked and bummed around, quite honestly. And they took me in. I'd been estranged from them for a little while, and I got the opportunity to go to the University of Rhode Island, and I made the best out of it. And so I basically went from being homeless and being a bouncer and a lifeguard and working in a clothing store and to getting to go to college, and I felt I needed to pay that back. I didn't think that you could get that opportunity just anywhere. And I decided to serve was the best way to do that. And so, very long story short, I joined Army ROTC, got my commission on May 21st, 1995, and started working as a cold bar recruiter for a couple months, then went to IOBC, Ranger School, Infantry Mortar Leaders Course, started at the 82nd Airborne Division, where I had just an incredible battalion commander who really understood leadership and combat leadership, and was fortunate enough to go to the 3rd Ranger Battalion. Got to go to the Strikers when they were first starting out, right back to the Ranger Regiment where I was the air, then got to command Charlie Company 175. Then went to SFOD selection, which did not turn out well for me. I didn't do so well there. But from there went to the asymmetric warfare group selection and did do well there and was picked up. Spent almost 6 years there. And then was selected for battalion command, wound up at Fort Jackson, where I realized that's probably where I made the most problems for my entire career, because by that time I had done 11 combat deployments, and I watched what we're doing at Fort Jackson, and we're not preparing soldiers for combat. We're preparing soldiers to be obedient, not disciplined. We're not reaching them. We're not getting to the right way. Quite honestly, I thought we were quite demeaning to them, and it wasn't the yelling that was demeaning. It was how we treated them. We treated them like non-thinking subhumans. And so I said, hey, nobody can really fire me as a battalion commander. I'm just going to do what I think is right. So I started changing stuff. That was not very popular until a guy named Dov Seidman, who wrote the book How, he heard what I was doing through a really good friend, Forrest Lincoln's. And he came down, he wrote a Forbes article about what I was doing at Fort Jackson. And overnight, I was a hero. From being, the biggest dirtbag guys who were constantly investigating me, trying to fire me, telling me I was all screwed up. And then, I was doing everything right. After that time, it was pretty clear I was going to be done. And so I got to work I got to head the leadership school, the fitness school, and the resiliency school at Fort Jackson, and then transitioned to 3 years ago. 3 years ago this week, I retired. So
okay. That's awesome. So what I'd like to say to you, and I think at my promotion ceremony to Master Sergeant, I think at my re-enlistment ceremony, and maybe the one quote that stayed with me through life. I mean, honest to God, and I told you I shared a little bit of my drill sergeant time with you before we came on, and I wanted to check and see a different way. I wanted to hear the same thing applied to me, except for as a staff sergeant at that time, I wasn't much into making moves. I was just trying to figure out myself and growing as a leader on my own. But Martin Luther King Jr. said about a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus, right? So I think that speaks volumes to what you did. It's not always what we've always done, doesn't mean it's always been right? And I've always hated that thing about, well, we've always done it this way, or this is what everybody, I'm not that guy. I like to kind of go out there and, push the parameters a little bit, see what actually works, and maybe there is a better way, and actually listen to people around you that might have some good ideas, and you can apply them. Well,
I was really fortunate growing up. Not only did I work for great officers, the McChrystals and the Ferreters and the Nicholsons and the Snookises and just Allens, just too many great officers. But what was really influential was I worked with great NCOs. And I probably should have been paying more attention to how the officers influenced people and got consensus. But guys like Hall and Birch, King and all these guys who, Greca, guys who are just so strong and so sound, and watching them lead and, hey, this is wrong, we're not going to do this anymore, and being able to change on a dime. Right. And, what I learned was there are a whole group of NCOs that are like that, but there's a whole group in the Army that hates that. Yeah. That was a little disappointing, because up to that point, I don't think I had ever come into contact with NCOs or officers that didn't want to adapt and push the envelope. And I got to Fort Jackson, and Fort Jackson, it was like there was the Army way, and then there was a Fort Jackson way. And the Fort Jackson way is in this like vortex of, 1950. Mm-hmm. And it was really tough.
Yeah. So you decide to retire. It's your time, so you're gonna jump out now. As you went through that process, the retirement process, the thought process with your family, obviously there's conversations. Okay, we're gonna go. Are we gonna stay here because our family's here? Our kids are in school. I mean, take me through the leading up to the retirement date. Like as far as what is the thought? As far as what are you gonna do when you grow up? It's time to get out of the uniform. The last 20 years we've known what we've been doing. Now we're gonna grow up, but what is that conversation like with the family?
Yeah. So, there were two pieces to that. One is I was completely disenchanted with the way I was treated, right? From zero to hero. It was just so apocryphal. It bothered me. The other piece was I had been diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and they wanted to medically retire me, and I fought it. And so I knew that even if they let me stay. I mean, they let me stay because I was in command. It was that simple. But I knew I was never going to get to do the things that I wanted to do again. So, I don't know that there was even a discussion of, hey, I'm thinking about getting out. I think it was, if I'm not going to get to do the cool guy stuff anymore, I'm not going to play. And this isn't my place anyway. Right. What was difficult is, and our transition process is so poor, right? I had people at Fort Jackson telling me, hey, you're never going to make as much money as you do as a battalion commander, as a lieutenant colonel. And, here's what you're qualified to do. And it was like truck driver, store manager, and police officer. Right. And I'm like, I don't want to do any of that stuff. So I started planning at about 2 years out, and I was really lucky. I think I mentioned Forrest Lincoln's. I called him. He was the only civilian I knew. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't know what to do. And he literally, I remember we talked, and he goes, boy, it sounds like you've really got some ideas on leadership. You should help people do that. Mm-hmm. And his brother, it was part of a company. And so I got to do some freelance work with them. And it was a no-brainer. I was like, I like this. What I had to learn was, they were doing a lot of training of junior leaders, and I'm kind of more comfortable with advising senior leaders.
Right.
So just kind of finding my niche on, hey, where does it fit for me? But, you know, I was like, hey, I like this, you know, so, and that was probably the biggest step in making that. And then, you know, I just said, hey, this is, you know, I wish I had probably given more, hey, this is what we're doing. But I think, you know, the decision was, let's stay and keep the kids. You know, my daughter was a senior in high school. She was going to graduate. My son was a freshman. I wanted him to stay one place. So it was like, we're going to stay here. So that also limits kind of, you know, what do you do in Columbia, South Carolina?
Right.
If you're not a lawyer and, you know, you're not a doctor, and you want to have a certain lifestyle, you got to figure out what you're going to do.
Right. And I think that's really awesome. I mean, the fact that you looked at it like that, I mean, those opportunities that present themselves, they don't always do it so clearly. I mean, I've talked to a bunch of infantry guys, I mean, and they're always telling me the same story about what they are qualified to do. And most of them, my last guest that I spoke to, Jay Hicks, we had made mention that a lot of times they talk about being a cop, because that's like an expectation that you're an infantry guy. What is that? What's transferable? And the problem is that's what everybody's hearing. And because everybody's hearing it, then they say it to the next guy, and then they say it to the next guy. And it becomes kind of depressing if you don't want to be a cop. People start getting that mentality of, man, and some move on out to do some ownership and veteran owners own businesses, but there are more opportunities. It's just a matter of finding the resources to do those things, and actually talking to people like yourself that can actually open the eyes of some guys and give them some opportunity to get out there and do bigger and better things, because they're transferable skills, that not just the shooting ones, right? There's leadership qualities, and there's great things they can do.
And it's not just the veterans that have to understand this. In fact, it's I spend a lot of time talking to HR folks about, and I talk about it in my book about capacity versus capability, right? Mm-hmm. Capability is, hey, here's a known skill that you have. You can do Excel, or you can shoot a gun, or whatever. But capacity is your ability to solve the unknown. Yep. And soldiers, whether they're officers or NCOs, have an incredibly high capacity to solve problems.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I keep telling people, look, let's stop telling veterans to make their resumes look like civilians, because it's not going to go so well. HR folks need to learn what veterans have done, and here's why. Because what I got from, and I won't say what head of the USO, but a head of a USO, state USO, he said, yeah, but we're only 1%. We can't ask HR to do that. I said, yeah, but we're 18% of leadership in companies. So when they're looking for leaders, they should look differently, and we should look different. I mean, you're telling me that a command sergeant major who's got a huge span of control shouldn't be making six figures? I don't even understand that. I mean, why wouldn't, you know, quite honestly, I think an E7 should be making six figures, because I know what they were responsible for, and I know what they can solve.
Right.
And we have to get better at letting the civilian world understand the capacity side. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, our transition process needs to be better, so that the bureaucrats that are running that, who I truly believe have the best of intentions, I don't think they're bad people.
Right.
They just have to understand, look, a person can do so much. You got to find what their purpose is, what they feel like their purpose is, because otherwise they're going to be gone in 12 to 18 months. Right. And we have the highest unemployment rate of any demographic, because guys aren't finding careers with purpose. They're finding jobs. And as much as I love Lowe's and Home Depot, and that's great, because there's guys who want to just, I don't want any responsibility, just I'll show up. But there's this huge percentage of guys, they want purpose. Because they've lived with purpose for so many years.
Uh-huh. And when you listen to the talking of these guys, that's what they typically say. It's just not the same, right? I mean, you got guys that are willing to pack their bag to fly overseas to do some type of job that's in that AOR based on the fact that they miss it and they're trying to get it back to it. You know what I mean? It's just really, it's I mean, maybe there's some money involved with that, but it's a depressing thing to say that at home, I'm not as comfortable as being deployed. And you just got to wonder, right? And I agree. I think the process itself, whether it be the TAPS process or Soldier for Life, whatever, they do have the best of intentions. You have to believe it, right? And the other part is with 5 days, it's not going to solve your problem. A lot of Army folks, I mean, us being Army, you go to a 40-hour class and you're not supposed to come back a subject matter expert. There's some onus on the individual to do some further research and to try error. And I think that's very similar in the transition space as well. You have to go out there and do some things on your own, but it's got to be geared a little differently. It's just got to be done a little different. And I know from what I understand is that they're doing some work to it right now to try to revamp it, which good, they need to, because you're missing people. There's different levels. You got to, E1s and E5s are in the same classes as E8s and E9s, and it doesn't, and you're getting the same information. And if you do get that separate class where it's O5s and senior NCOs, you're still getting the same class as the E1s and E5s. There's no benefit. So you're telling us the same, and it's just not applicable. So they have to do some revamping in it. And I think that'll get done shortly. Well, hopefully anyway.
Well, I think, I don't know if you know Joel Carpenter. Joel Carpenter was a 1st Ranger Battalion guy, but he and a SEAL, they wrote a really good transition book that looks like for infantry guys, we had 7-8, kind of infantry basic handbook there. They wrote that, and it kind of goes into, hey, if you're this, you need to look at this kind of stuff, consider this. And it doesn't tell you how to do it, but it tells you, here's how you should be thinking.
Yeah.
And I think we need more of that. I think we need more of, look, what do you like to do? What brings you joy? Do you like to work with your hands? Do you like to, work with people? Do you want to stay away from people?
Right.
What does your life look like after service? That was the big thing for me is what did I want my life to look like? Because I spent so much time away from my children. I wanted to be able to see them play sports and go to things that they were in. And, so I said, well, I got to control my own schedule. Well, that starts you down a path, right? So I think I just don't know that we attack the problem correctly. I think we're doing the best we can, but I just don't think we're attacking the problem real well.
And something you had made mention in a video that I had watched about you. You had made mention about asking questions, and that's interesting to me that you're speaking like that right now. You were talking about, instead of we leaders typically feel like we're the problem solvers, and we tell people how to do it, and this is what you should do. I'm going to give you advice, and this is the way you need to do this, as opposed to asking the question, like you're making mention just now. I think that if you asked more questions, you'd probably help them find those answers, because we're grown people with logical thinking brains. Well, some of us anyway, logical. we can think for ourselves, and if you enlighten us, or at least click on the light a little bit, maybe flick them a little bit with prodding questions or just thought-provoking questions, it kind of gives them the ability to choose their path. But you have to give them the question instead of, hey, infantry guy, you should really be a cop, because that's transferable. That's kind of how it goes, instead of really giving them the ability to think for themselves and maybe even helping them along the path, because you're asking those questions. At some point, they may ask how or why, or, that's important, I guess, right?
I think, I was just having this conversation today with like the closest person in my life. And I was saying, we've lost curiosity in leadership, and we've lost curiosity across the board. Listen to conversations that are going on. People aren't asking questions about what's going on with the person. If they ask a question, it's so that they can tell their story. And I talk about one of the foundations, I think, of good leadership. I think you can be a leader without this. I think if you're going to be a great leader, you have to have curiosity. I think you have to abandon what you think you know and go, okay, let's pretend I don't know anything. Let's pretend I'm the dumbest guy in the room, which is not that hard for me to pretend. and go, all right, what is this person thinking? Where are they coming at this from? If I have a disagreement with them, it's probably not because they're a bad person. It's probably because they see it differently than I do. So I need to understand how they're seeing it, because how can I lead I mean, sure, if I'm in a position of authority, just say, do it this way.
Right.
But again, not very effective.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, hey, so tell me how you see this and why you're going in this direction. We just, I was thinking actually today after my conversation, I almost want to write an article or do a video on, we have to bring curiosity back into society. Let's really think about like what's making a person tick. Mm-hmm. And what, when somebody says something, and I mean, we see it all over Facebook, right? Hey, I think this way you're a Nazi. I think this way you're a snowflake.
Yeah.
I don't want to label you. I want to go, hey, what is making you come to that conclusion? Like, why do you think that way? I'm not going to say you're Nazi. I want to know you've come to this decision. Tell me why.
Based on what? What do you see? Yep.
How are you seeing this? Because I think, the foundation of kind of my beliefs on leadership and my beliefs, period, are, I don't believe people are good or bad. I think they're just people.
Right.
People are people. Mm-hmm. And, they do things and we interpret and give value to their actions, whether it's based on social contract, hey, you did this, that's illegal, that's bad. Or whether it's based on personal responsibility. Hey, I think you should have done this. Here's my value on that. And so if we look at people as neutral, they're not good or bad, then what's bringing them to where they're going?
Right.
Because that's what matters. And when we lead, and that's, and I don't know, I probably shouldn't even say this, but so I'm a guy who voted for Trump, right? I'm also helping a Democratic senator or a Democratic legislator run for governor here in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I for the guy I voted for, I don't like that he leads the way he does because I don't think he's a good leader. I think he's doing good stuff, but I don't think he's a good leader because he's not inclusive. He's not bringing people together.
Right.
It has nothing to do with, where I stand on policy or, I thought he'd be a good leader. I liked what he said. I do think he's doing some good stuff. I think he's doing some really bad stuff.
Yeah.
I thought the last president did some good stuff. I thought he did some really bad stuff. But I think that when we look at leaders for our country, which is something that we're in a really big deficit of right now. We don't have leaders. We have politicians.
Right.
We have people who say what they want to say. Who believe that they're right or their constituents are right or, their truth is right, as opposed to bringing us together and saying, you mentioned Martin Luther King. I think of Martin Luther King. I think of John F. Kennedy. I think of, to a certain extent, Reagan. Men who brought us together and said, okay, well, we disagree, but we're all Americans and this is what we're going to do. And we've lost that a little bit.
I agree wholeheartedly. I couldn't agree more, actually. So what I enjoy is though these types of conversations. I mean, I think that perspective and perception is why we are in certain ways. I mean, you said it clearly, right? So we read a book and we should act a certain way, right? There's a leadership manual in the Army. And if we all read that leadership manual, which I know I did when I was a young E5, because they made you do it in all these schools. I know officers read it because you get 22-100 and all that good stuff. Everybody knew it. You guys know FM 7-8. I remember reading that as an E5. I was in Corps Alert back in the day when I was a private. I used to read all kind of stuff. But anyway, you can read 22-100 and you can read what leadership is. The application of what that book says is what counts, right? So the fact that if we all perceived it the same way, we'd all act in the same manner and we'd all do the same things robotically. But because we do see it differently and we learn from other things other than just this book, there are different realities to it. And so understanding why, I used to tell my soldiers often, look, when you do something, I'm empowering you. I mean, that's what I think is huge, is empowerment. So I empower them to make decisions. And I want them to do it. And they're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen because I make a bunch, even now, but make mistakes. It's okay. It's called growing. It's called learning. You learn from them, right? But when they came back to me and we had the conversation, the only thing I'd get frustrated and I may punish them or whatever it is, or make them write the regulation or whatever it may be, was if they told me I don't know. I could never stand the I don't know answer when they would make a decision on something. Not because I think that's a cop out. I think they don't want to tell me the truth. I mean, they didn't decision, but the bottom line was if they could tell me why they did it, okay. Now I see why you did it. Now let me just explain to you why I think that's wrong, or why I think that you could have put a little bit more thought. You might have not put this into the equation, whatever the case may be. But it became a conversation, and we both learned from it, because now I knew that, one, I wasn't very clear with the guidance in which I gave. It caused me to reflect on myself to ensure that I was giving the right information. But more importantly, it was for them to grow. And I think that we eliminate growth when we try to tell, and not let them be, what you would say, curious, right? And I think that's huge. I think that is significantly missing. So moving just a little forward, right? So you get out, you retire. Now you decide to do what you're doing now. Have you been doing what you've been doing now since you got out?
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, just with different groups, right? Yep. So
good.
I started off really kind of on the corporate side, and I certainly enjoy that. But you know, I've always been involved in athletics and sports, and I thought, you know, I certainly saw what was going on in the NFL. I see sometimes what goes on in the NBA, and I go, I think I can help there. I think I can assist based on some lessons that I learned. Right. And so, I, you know, initially was very lucky to have Dov Seidman bring me into some of the NFL stuff. Worked with the Denver Broncos before they did their Super Bowl run. And then I basically got, you know, I got an invite to go visit the Carolina Panthers, ran into Coach Rivera, and he's done more to open my door into the NFL because, you know, he's an Army brat. His dad was a chief warrant, and you know, he recognizes here are these head coaches, and they're really good at what they do, and they're good leaders, but they're focused. They got to focus on the bottom line. So it's kind of nice to have a guy come in and go, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you, you know, we had a great talk yesterday. I was up there, and we had a great talk about a way they could handle the new rule that the NFL did. You know, been fortunate enough now to be involved with Troy Vincent at operations for the NFL, and been there a couple of times to talk to them about how do we look at culture? How do we look at what we're doing? And then, you know, was really honored to be the keynote speaker at the Head Coaches and Owners Conference this year.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, you know, I like that. Those guys are very similar to the men and women that we used to work with all the time.
Right.
And sometimes it's easier for me to relate to them than it is for some of my corporate clients, because I don't have an MBA, right? I didn't, you know, go to business school and sit behind a desk for years, but I know what these guys are doing, and I get it. And, you know, I enjoy kind of not just what they do, but their willingness to improve.
Yeah.
They really, there's very little arrogance that I see on that side, on that leadership side. Right.
And I find that to be, again, like I said, I don't want to keep saying we're aligned because it's kind of weird, right? But my idea of getting involved in the sporting world was based on the fact that in the military, I mean, I love sports, all the sports. I played sports. I just like sports, right? But being in the military, I love the team concept. It was, I mean, when you could push away from I always tell people often, like I truly do, when we grew, the military from an enlisted perspective, I is E1 to E4. It's I want a day off. I need some time. You get promoted to E5. It's still a little bit about I, but now you got to answer for them, you know, and then you get to an E6 right. And now it's a little bit more about them. And then, well, from E7 to above, it's never any more about me. It's about them. And that's leadership, right? And leadership is, I mean, they take care of us as leaders. They make us look great, or they make us look horrible. But the fact of the matter is, when they're making us look horrible, it's because we're not doing the right thing for them, right? So, but what I see is that that there is so much of that likeness on the football field, on the baseball diamond, in the basketball court, and on the hockey rink, right? I look at that stuff and I see how they have to play together to win something, to do something. And if they're out of line, they don't accomplish what their mission is. And I see that there's so much about I this and I that, and the teams, they can understand and they can use the we concept. And I think that's why I focus and want to be in that area, because the one that is distracting being the I guy all the time on the news and I this, and it becomes that's who's always on the news. But there's a whole team that is answering that question for them. And when you're asking me about this guy, how do you combat that? And how do you create better relationships? So that's where my desire to be in there is to be in that world. And I'm not really concerned so much about it at the professional level. I was looking more along the lines of the coming up level, because the best guy is not the leader majority of the time. You know what I mean? And that's something that the Army does teach in a sense, right? How many times you scored a 300 on your PT test, so now you're in charge of this group of people. Yeah, you're strong. Yeah. But doesn't mean you're a leader. Just like a guy who hits 500 home runs or 50 home runs doesn't mean he's the leader of the team. He might be the all-star of the team. How do you get that guy that's the 250 batter that has great on-base percentage to actually lead that guy who is the best, right? The all-star. And that's where those relationships, I understand that. That's where I see it as weak. Yeah,
so it's funny because one of the guys that I advise, who's one of my favorite guys to advise, a guy named Coach Petramala, Dave Petramala. He's the head coach at Johns Hopkins. And, he has, his desire to be a better leader is amazing. And I love watching him adapt, his leadership style. But, he's a we guy. And lacrosse, sometimes the way guys come up in the high school level it's a me, right? You go to showcases where you have to show good because coaches are looking at you, not the team. They're looking at you to recruit you. Mm-hmm. And how do you get me guys to be we guys? Mm-hmm. And we talk about, we're about to start our second season together, and we talk about players want to vote for captains that are the best players, as opposed to who are the best leaders. Right. And what we forget is a guy who's the best player, he may carry 10 logs on the field. Mm-hmm. But in leadership, he can only carry 2. And a guy who can only carry 2 logs on the field, he might be able to carry 10 logs in the leadership world. Mm-hmm. And they both have a place on that team. Right. And, and it may be more difficult at a place like Hopkins, where I look at, these are guys, they wouldn't be going to Hopkins if they weren't great athletes, right? They're not the standard Hopkins student. Mm-hmm. So they need different kinds of leadership because, I look at, so my son just started playing football at USC, at University of South Carolina.
Ooh, watch out, Gamecocks, right? That's awesome.
And so, I look at him and I go, well, he would have gotten into University of South Carolina anyway. I don't have the same concerns. Had he gone to Hopkins, where he wouldn't have gotten into Hopkins if it wasn't for lacrosse, he needs different leadership stuff there. Right. Because he's got to balance some stuff that's not going to come easy for him. Whereas I'm just not that worried about him at a school where he would normally get in. Right. And I think that on the field, and I love working with the professional teams, but my teammates and I, Jim Stagnita and Tim Paul, we do a lot of stuff with high schools, and we do a lot of stuff with colleges, and I enjoy that because I think we can set guys up for success if they get to the next level. And at the end of the day, right? So if you look at high school players, you're looking at less than 7% will go on to play at the collegiate level. Right. If you look at college players, less than 0.03% will go on to play professionally. Exactly. So, but you know what they're all going to be? They're all going to be fathers and mothers and husbands and wives and managers or employees, so we have a vested interest in in helping them understand leadership. Well, I don't mind. I enjoy doing those. There's obviously, I mean, honestly, there's more revenue in the professional side. Right. But I love working with Johns Hopkins as much as I love working with the Carolina Panthers. I mean, they're just two great programs that I'm really proud to be a part of.
That's awesome. So now that you've found your way out there, you're doing great. Congratulations. What I did want to make mention, though, because you alluded to it earlier, you did write a book. It was A Light in the Darkness: Leadership Development for the Unknown, and you had made reference to it. If you could just tell us what is that about, and when did you publish it? When did it come out?
It came out last year.
Okay.
Again, the Forrest Lincolns who helped me find my way in the civilian world said, you've got some ideas that you got to write in a book. I don't like leadership books because they're how-to books, right? They tell you how to be a leader. And one, I disagree with 90% of them, to include our manual that talked about influence, because I think influence is not what you want to do. I think you want to inspire, just like you talked about, because just like motivation, I can influence you in a negative way. I can't inspire you in a negative way. It's impossible. So I think, influence is manipulative. Motivation is manipulative. Inspiration, man, that's not manipulative. That's just real. That's as authentic as you can get.
Right.
And I wanted to capture that. And I also found that most leadership books were personal stories about, hey, here's how I did it. And I don't think I did it as well as a whole bunch of other guys. So the only place that you'll see the word I is in my introduction. Everything else is about, here's how some really cool drill sergeants did it. And here's how some really cool Rangers did it. And here's how Polaroid did it. And here's how Xerox missed the boat on something. And it's, if there's war stories in there, they're just stories. They're not my stories necessarily. They're stories to illustrate a point. Right. And the big point is this capability over capacity. We value capability. Resumes are capability, nothing about capacity. Testing is about capability, nothing about capacity. We have to start looking at people for capacity. And what I'm most proud of in the book is I knew that there was this idea between the difference between inspiration and motivation, right? And no matter what anybody says, I'm never going to say they're wrong. Intrinsic, extrinsic, etc. Yep, absolutely. But my key was I can't do inspiration in a negative way. But then I always got caught with people asking me, so how do you be an inspirational leader? And I didn't know. And I was at a seminar, and I read a poem called A House Divided, which is a poem about race relations in the United States. And it came to me. And I said, okay, I figured it out. I know how to be an inspirational leader. And I developed this formula, and I said, this is how you do it. And it's at the end of the book. And it's what I'm most proud of in the book, is because, you think, hey, I want you to be an inspirational leader. And people think of Martin Luther King and Gandhi and JFK and all these people. JFK got people to go to the moon when we had just started flying airplanes. Right. And people are always like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And what I think I broke it down to is, yeah, you can. It's really easy. Because, not to give it away, but at the end of the day, if you create hope in people, and hope is what you're doing is worth doing, and you can do it, and it's something that you'll be good at. And trust is, I got your back. I'm going to resource you. And if you fail, I'm going to pick you up and keep you going. And if you create hope and trust, you've created inspiration. That's all inspiration is it's providing hope to people and trust to people. And if you do that, people will do anything in the world. And I've seen it. I never worried about see, this is where, and I'm rambling on. I'm sorry, but
it's great. I love it. Keep talking.
This is where leaders get it wrong, right? And this is where leaders get it wrong consistently. They focus on the task, right? Hey, we have to accomplish this. We have to get to this line of money, or we have to get to this level of expertise. And that's not what we need to focus on. What stops people from doing anything? Fear. So now I got to focus on, how do I eliminate fear? I eliminate fear by creating courage. So how do I create courage? I create courage by providing hope and trust. That's how I create courage. Right. So now stop worrying about the task and trust your people with the task. Start figuring out how you provide them hope and trust to accomplish the task that you don't need to be worried about. Right, you need to be worried about leading. And and man, if they do that, the outcomes are so amazing.
That's right. Right.
It's just, and when I reverse engineered it and I thought about any leadership that I had been successful in, I didn't worry about the task. I got into a really, not in combat. I had combat leaders who got it, but when I went to TRADOC, I had one commander who was very, very bad, and he was the worst leader I had ever worked for. And he said, "You got to worry about the training of these privates." And I said, "Nope, not my job." And I said, "I don't mean to be cold, but I don't care about the privates. They're not my responsibility. My drill sergeants are my responsibility. It's their job to train the privates. That's our mission, and they accomplish the mission. I'm going to resource them." And boy, he hated that. He's like, "You don't care about the privates." I'm like, "Yeah, as people I do, but no, they're not my thing. My thing are these guys. And if I resource my leadership, my drill sergeants, my company commanders, my first sergeants, and I provide this inspirational leadership, they're going to do a great job with these privates."
Right.
And I had learned that from guys like Craig Nixon and Dan Allen and Mike Ferreter and Tom Snookus. That's how they led. Right. And Joe Votel. And now I got to this TRADOC world where, wait, why am I responsible for the thing that's happening at this level? That's not my job.
Right.
So I think, but when I got in the civilian world, we focus a lot on stuff that's not our job as leaders.
Right. I think that's really awesome. The fear conversation is huge, and because that stops. There's a lot of folks that are using that. Like I know Will Smith talked about it on a video he did about jumping out of an airplane. That everything on all the greatness is on the other side of fear, and that was pretty cool to listen to talk. That was inspirational when you listen to it. And I believe that. I think what you're saying is factual. The part that I like is as you're talking about, you got the fear part, which is good. The trust part is it's paramount. And I don't know, it kind of goes back to what I was telling you when we first started talking about the drill sergeant, where I try to kind of figure out where it was that I fit, where leadership fit, and how could I be a little bit different than the yelling and the constant barking, because it becomes ineffective, right? But what I realized was when the soldier trusts you, when a human being, forget soldier, and we can leave that all away, right? You just talk about when a human being trusts you, that is when great things can happen, not just for that individual, but for yourself as well, because trust is something that actually you have to earn it. And it's not earned in a 5-minute presentation. Where I can say something inspirational, which is great, but the act of trusting someone takes time. It builds through a relationship. And there's something that says, you're not going to hurt me. And because of that you're not going to hurt me, people will give into you and give you more than you ever even imagined, even if it was, just in the genuineness of what you do. And I listened to you talk, and I watched your videos again. I'm going to put that TEDx talk on there because I truly enjoyed listening to it. But it's about not just what you're saying. It's where it's coming from, and I hear it when you're talking. I see it, and obviously the book is going to be a great read for me. So I'm excited.
So let me challenge you on something though, because he said something, and I think everything after what you said was right, but trust is earned, right? You see, trust is earned, and you believe that. And so I'm going to ask you, when was the last time you flew?
Well, I haven't done that in a while. I hate doing that.
So,
but I get you. I understand. I see where you're going.
Last time you flew in an airplane, did you know your pilot's name?
Only when he announced it.
Right. And did you know where they got their training?
Nope.
Did you know where they wound up in their class?
Not at all.
Did you know if they were married, having marital problems, or going through a divorce?
Stop asking me. I don't know the answer. You're hurting.
Exactly. Exactly. You didn't know anything about this person.
Right.
And you trusted them to do the right thing. Now we can say, well, we trust the system. Okay, let's go with that for a second.
Right.
You get mad when somebody cuts you off on the road?
Without a doubt.
You know why?
Why?
Because you trusted them with a 6,000-pound automobile to do the right thing. You didn't trust the system. You trusted that person to do the right thing. And you wouldn't, if you didn't trust him, you would have gone, of course that idiot cut me off because he's an idiot. I don't trust anybody.
Right.
We trust human beings with our very lives and the lives of our family every day. Wow. I believe that as a leader, trust isn't earned. Trust is given. I'm giving you all my trust because I do it with strangers. I don't count my change every time I get my change back. Right. I don't look at the waiter spit in my food. And if I go to the doctor, the emergency room, I don't say, hey, where'd you go to medical school? Where'd you graduate in your class? I trust that you're doing the right thing.
Right.
And furthermore, we all know that we don't want to go to a store and be followed around for the first 15 minutes to make sure we're not going to steal anything. We want to be trusted. We have a desire as humans to be trusted. And somehow that doesn't translate. So when somebody says, well, they have to earn my trust. So you've created some imaginary BS bar in your head that somebody has to reach. Who are you? You're not, you want to be trusted. So I say, no, trust has to be given, and it has to be given to people. The one thing I can promise is you're going to get burned. Somebody is going to violate your trust. And here's the difference between good leaders and great leaders. A good leader will see that burn and make sure no one else can do that to them again. And a great leader will make sure that person can't do it to him again. But the door's still open for that to happen to him again. And I talk to leadership about this all the time. Guys, you want to be a real leader, you got to give trust. And you're going to get hurt and you're going to get screwed and bad things are going to happen. And that's why you're a leader. Because if it was perfect, then who cares? We could get anybody to be leaders. Right. But this idea, and I really talk about it with coaches and players, because it's you earn your right, you earn your right. Wait a second. When we were in the Rangers, we used to have this idea of earning your right to be there, forgetting about the selection process and everything else that this kid had done. And then we went to combat. And we went, nope, got to trust this guy right away because tomorrow he could be providing support by fire. He could be entering a building with us. And you realize, no, trust is given. And it's just got to be that way. And it's uncomfortable, but that's leadership. That's awesome. Look, I'll tell you, I liked the line of question, and I felt kind of bad because I kept saying, no, I don't know. No, it was great. No, that's a really interesting concept. And while you were talking about it, I was thinking about it. And the fact is we do, in a sense, trust almost everybody. And it's, you start getting into relationships and then you start wondering why you have failed relationships repeatedly. And it's based on a lot of the closed doors where you had said this person did it, but you can't close the door for that person. And it's funny because the people that are closest to us, we give the least amount of trust to. Right. The people who are complete strangers who mean absolutely nothing to us, we trust with our very lives. And the people that are closest to us have to reach this bar in our head that says, oh, you have to do this for me to really feel like I can trust you. You can come and have dinner at my house now. You know what I mean? That's it. Crazy. That's it. That's awesome. So let me ask you this. If you had some advice to give, if someone is getting ready to get out of the military, what advice would you give? And what's a good piece of advice to give someone as they're transitioning, whether they're 24 months out, 12 months out, just getting ready to get out? Where do you put them at? Well, I would certainly say, look, 24 months out is about what you need to start thinking about. I mean, otherwise you're a little behind the power curve, and that's hard for guys to think that far ahead and certainly start executing. But that gives you time to try stuff, right? To take some leave and go give something a try. And I think that's really, really important. Two things that will make all the difference is, one, identify what you want your life to look like, right? Do you want to work 9 to 5? Do you want to, do you want your weekends off, or do you want to, or don't you care? Do you want to be home in the mornings, but what does it look like? Whatever it looks like has a price tag associated with it. And then at least, well, I need to make at least this much money if I want to live this kind of life.
Right.
And then identify, what do you enjoy? What brings you a sense of purpose? What do you get excited about doing? And I'm not saying passion, right? I don't want you to be passionate, because that's feelings, and eventually that will end as well. I want you to be something that you're comfortable committing to, right? That you go, if I have to do this, even when it's a pain in the butt, yep, I'm going to do it. Like, I did one with my friend Jim. We went from Baltimore to Virginia to New Jersey to New York, like in 3 days, doing different little things along the way. And it's a pain in the butt, but I don't mind being committed to it. Right. I couldn't say, boy, I loved every second of it, because it's a long time in a car. But I was committed to it, and I didn't mind. Like, I didn't complain. I was like, yep, doing it, going to the next thing, going to the next thing. So I think if you find what your purpose to be, I think you can feel really good about, continuing. And I think it lasts for at least a few years, not 12 to 18 months. And I think if you do those two things, I think you can really transition successfully.
Outstanding. Well, thank you. So now on every show, I ask for someone to give me a "you can't make this stuff up" story. And it could be funny. It could be, I can't believe it really happened. Whatever the case would be, something that a person that never served a day in their life could not believe you did. Like, I've heard stories where people are like, and you didn't die, or you didn't go to jail, just those type of things. And I don't have to, you can plead the fifth, but if you would share a story with us.
Boy. There's probably too many to even share. I'll tell you, I'm trying to think of something that's kind of humorous, because most of the stuff that I remember, you sit there. Oh, I got a good one. All right. Okay. All right. So we're in Afghanistan, and it's wintertime. I was commanding Charlie Company 175. And, look, Rangers on deployment, if we're not hitting targets, they're playing with their knives, which means they're cutting themselves, which means you got to take knives away. And then they're learning how to stitch stuff up. And, we're supposed to practice on oranges, but they practice on their own legs. And they're giving each other IVs all the time. And, I mean, that's just who they are. And so we got these new tasers. And we were told, hey, look, they have a range of like 25 meters. And we were like, oh, all right. So of course, Rangers got, hey, before I take it on target, I'm going to test it out. So they were smart the first time. They put out an E-type silhouette, cardboard E-type silhouette, which is pretty thick, put it at 25 meters, shot this thing, which has like these two giant prongs that come off of it. And at 25 meters, it went through the E-type silhouette. So then they decide, well, let's see how strong it is. So Ranger Private, now there's snow all over the ground. In Bagram, where we were part of the Joint Strike Force, it's a rock base. It's all rocks. And so it's like a foot of snow with a bunch of rocks underneath it. They take off his shirt, because we don't want to rip anything out in the snow. And they shoot this Ranger Private at 25 meters, and it embeds like so deep into his skin, you can't believe it. And he starts twitching, and he's cutting himself up on the stones underneath. I'm not there, right? So I get, hey, sir, can you come out? We got a little bit of a problem. I'm like, okay, yeah. So we were testing out the stuff. We got to test out our equipment before we bring it on target, sir. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, that makes sense, guys. And then I look over as I'm walking out the door, and the snow is covered with blood, and this private, and I'm like, what did you do? Right? How could we do this so, now I got, okay, I don't want to take it away from them, but I mean, so there was just some verbal counseling of let's not test that stuff out on people again. But when I tell people that, well, wait, why would they ever test it on a person? And I sit there and go, of course they'd want to test it on a person.
Why wouldn't they test it on a person?
Of course they test it on a person. But yeah, that's a story that I won't forget. And I want to say it was Corey Remsburg, who's a big social media personality and incredible. I was fortunate enough to reenlist him. Who funniest guy in the world. Who I think he was the one who shot it, and he was just like he just figured, like, of course I did the right thing.
Right.
Other than this kid's completely cut up, I'm not really sure how I'm going to talk to anybody about what happened to this kid. But
right.
Yeah, okay, thanks, guys.
Hey, but listen, I got to tell you, I never served in Ranger Regiment. I was in Corps Alerts when I was a private, and I remember there was an incident that happened at I want to say it was First Bat, and a lot of those guys had come to brag because of that came out. Anyway, as soon as you started going down that path of we got these tasers, I knew and someone got jacked because I was a private, and that happened to be like I learned qualifying and some other stuff, at a really young age, understanding how great it was. So now I can appreciate it, and I think it goes back to the one word that you had made mention, culture. It's an acceptable, and I don't want to say acceptable culture, but listen, if you know the story, you can hear like 3 words and know where that's going because you know the culture, and be it good or bad, it's just it's something in which you guys live over there, and I love the stories because you guys love those organizations. I've never, ever once heard a Ranger talk bad about Ranger Regiment, ever.
No, it was the best. That place and the NCOs and officers in it taught me more about leadership than any book could ever fill. And what I'm lucky enough to do now is create deliberate cultures for people, because we had a deliberate culture, right? The Ranger Creed is our culture.
Oh yeah.
And it's very clear, and it's aspirational, right? Nobody ever meets it 100%. Nobody. But it's something to try for. And because it's deliberate, we know we know the right and left limits, right? Mm-hmm. So quite honestly, there was nothing wrong culture-wise in what he did.
Right.
Judgment, but he didn't violate our culture.
Right.
When guys violate the culture, now you can say, look, how does that doesn't fit? You can't be here because it violates who we are, and it's very clearly defined who we are. And what organizations don't do is they don't have deliberate cultures. Cultures lie in their heads, and they say things like, "Oh, we have grit." Oh, okay, what's grit mean to you? Because I guarantee it doesn't mean the same thing to somebody else. Yeah. Or the NFL, and I give them a hard time about this because I recommended against it when they came up with it, is respect. Mm-hmm. Respect is an NFL word. And I go, okay, so a kid who grows up in downtown Chicago gets respect and maintains respect a very different way than a kid who's grown up in Boca Raton, Florida.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't have the same idea of what respect is. So you say, we're going to have respect for each other. It's not going to look the same.
Right.
So let's come up with our own words, and let's come up with the definitions of those words to say who we are and who we're going to be. But yeah, I think you're right. I couldn't do what I do now if it wasn't for the regiment. I love the regiment. I've never met a guy from the regiment that I don't care about in some way, shape, or form. I don't like them all, but I care about them all. And it was an amazing. Everybody's got good units, but that was the right place for me.
That's awesome. Well, anyway, listen. Before we head out, I want to ask if anybody wanted to reach out to you, where would be places that they could find you? Where would you care for them to reach out?
I think, I love it when people reach out on LinkedIn. My email is jc.glick at Kenning Associates, KENNING Associates.com. If they can go to my website, which is jcglick.com. But I love it when people, engage. And I think you and I have engaged, and there's a number of other folks that I've engaged with on LinkedIn just to talk about leadership. and they're interested in books on Amazon. And the second book should be out in July. It's called Meditations of an Army Ranger. And what we're talking about in that is some just philosophy on leadership, the difference between empathy and sympathy.
Yeah.
How do we get people to act appropriately? Just kind of philosophy stuff.
All right. Well, when that book comes out, make sure you push it my way. I'll advertise for you and put it out there because I'd love for people to get it.
That's great. Thank you.
Outstanding. Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have today. I appreciate you for coming. Until next time when I see you. Wait a minute. Hey, JC.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I didn't know if I said it, but I wanted to make sure that you knew. I truly appreciated our time, and I wanted to ensure that I said thank you in front of everybody, but more importantly, thank you so much for taking your time to spend with me and teaching me.
I enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thank you so much for having me.
Outstanding. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you next time on the other side.